Big changes are coming to PoE in the new Prophecy League. GGG have just announced a whole bunch of changes, which I find really interesting. So I'm going to go through these changes one by one and discuss some of the implications. The first change we have is that Energy Shield counts at 60% as the value of HP for traps. That means when you're running the Labyrinth with an Energy Shield based build, either hybrid or pure CI or even low life, when you run over a trap, instead of the trap doing an enormous chunk of your damage that you can't heal because you have no flasks, well, now it's going to do a lot less. It's only going to do 60% as much. However, EBZOMOM builds are still kind of screwed, which I think is really unfair, because it only counts for Energy Shield that's protecting life, not Energy Shield that's protecting mana. I think what GGG is saying is that EBZOMOM, you suck, and you're always going to suck. Don't do that part of the build. Anyway, moving on. A really big change. It's going to have a lot of salt, but I think it's very necessary for the meta. Chaos Conversion has been reduced to 60% of its prior stats. That means Voltaxic goes from 100% down to 60%, and also Infernal Mantle and Consuming Dark also get reduced by 60% of their total values. This basically means it's impossible now, actually impossible, to get 100% Chaos Conversion, which greatly reduces the power of the builds and makes you way more vulnerable to Reflect. So it waits to see whether this is still going to dominate the meta or if it will even still be good. But it is a very big change to the current meta of PoE. Another big change, the Hexproof Curse Immunity is now a prefix that can be bypassed by a particular unique item that's being added into the new Prophecy League. That means there is an item out there that bypasses Curse Immunity. I don't need to tell you how ridiculously overpowered that is, considering how crazy good curses are in Path of Exile. And now their one major weakness, bang, it's gone. You can now do a Curse Immune map, it's no problem. We'll have to wait and see how good this item is. Maybe you lose a lot of stats or a lot of power by equipping it, but it's a huge, huge deal for curse-based characters. Moving on, we've also got a mechanic change to Taunt. Taunt now has a unique new graphic. Looks pretty cool. And enemies that are taunted do 10% less damage to people who are not you. So even taunting enemies that have a lot of AoE can still protect your allies, or, weirdly enough, if you're a summoner, you can protect your minions by taunting enemies, which I think is kind of funny. We've got some item changes as well. Unique jewels now possess 3 different tiers of rarity, and they're rarer than before. This should be quite welcome, because I think when you play PoE, unique jewels have been tended to drop more than any other item, and they get kind of boring and no one really cares about them except for the most rare. So now they're going to drop a great deal less frequently, which means they'll probably be more valuable, and it might actually be exciting to see a rare jewel drop for once. I'm looking forward to that. Additionally, and they kind of snuck this patch note in there hoping nobody would notice, 4th tier chase uniques, so things like Shavron's Wrappings, Comb's Hearts, the top tier uniques, they've been made rarer. This combined with the removal of Piranha's League means, well, it's going to be a little bit harder to get those best in slot unique items and those crazy, crazy power uniques. Some people are really upset about this, justifiably. I mean, it's an interesting change. Certainly a big step away from the Kadiro Handout League. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out. Chris Wilson did specifically say on Reddit that it's a very small change. So maybe instead of 4 times as many uniques you get for 4th tier, it's like 3 times as many. So it could be a small change. That's what he says. We'll have to wait and see. Finally, the final change to items is that weapons can now that roll both caster and attack mods. We've talked about this earlier, but they have a much greater chance of only rolling one type. So you can roll all caster or all attack, and the chance that you're going to get a hybrid weapon that has attack and caster is much lower, which I think is pretty cool, because now it's actually easier to roll daggers, scepters, wands, because honestly rolling them was very expensive and a pain in the ass. Also, the highest spell damage implicits for wands and scepters can now go all the way up to 42 and 40% respectively. So that's a pretty significant buff to wands and scepters, and might encourage people to move a bit away from whirling blades as a movement skill, because you can get a lot of spell damage from these items. Now on to skill changes. There's a lot of skill changes that are being announced in the upcoming Prophecy League. First thing is that Ancestor Totems now emerge 40% faster when first placed, and have 50% more life, and they can be active from another 40% away from the wearer, the owner. Now this is actually kind of crazy, because those are very big numbers, guys. Those are huge numbers, and it's actually going to massively increase the use of Ancestor Totems. I think we're really going to see Ancestor Totem builds come out in force in the new patch, and melee characters can finally have very strong tools to deal with dangerous enemies without having to get close and die. Dealing with volatiles, dealing with this. I think nearly every melee character will probably have, at the very least, a 4-link Ancestor Totem setup. So, and there are two Ancestor Totem type skills now, one AoE, one single target. So this is a very exciting change, and I'm glad to see that they're massively buffing this otherwise unused totem type. Now, this is a big change, and this kind of ties in with the whole bypassing curse immunity thing, is that Enfeeble is actually being nerfed. They've reduced the amount of crit multi that it reduces on monsters by basically 20%. This is a big deal because Enfeeble is probably the most overpowered curse in the game, right next to Temporal Chains, and reducing the amount of crit damage it reduces means that things like critical strike maps and high crit monsters are just going to be a lot more dangerous. Maybe you can't completely rely on Enfeeble to reduce all the damage you take from everything. Of course, now that you can bypass curse immunity, I don't know, I feel like overall this is still a buff to curses, but hey, you know, it's definitely interesting. Next up, I'm really excited about this change. Shield Charge is now an area of effect skill, and when you deal damage to enemies as you charge through, so now you're really going to feel like a Spartan badass. You're just going to charge through a bunch of enemies, kill them, and then slam into a large pack of enemies, and they're going to explode and die. Shield Charge is actually a real skill now, guys. It's only taken about 4 years, but it's very exciting. It's going to be great. I can't wait to see the Shield Charge builds that come out. Maybe I'll even make a Shield Charge build, because the idea of dealing lots of damage with tankiness and mobility, holy crap. Kind of minor change, but the cast time for Ice Nova and Vol Ice Nova has been reduced from 900 ms to 800 ms, just a little bit faster on our Ice Nova. And Warlord's Mark, now the additional chance to stun doesn't scale anymore. Apparently it was creating bugs and giving people like a 100% chance to stun or something weird. So whatever, that's been adjusted. This is surprisingly good, is that the elemental proliferation support radius is being increased from 12 to 16 units. This is basically makes it bigger, significantly bigger than the elementalist proliferation, and means with the right kind of build and enough damage, you might actually be able to get this thing to be pretty good. So now there's a bit of competition to the elementalist's amazing elemental conflux proliferation. We'll have to wait and see how people end up using this. Finally, the last skill change is that the spell totem support now has a smaller damage penalty. This is actually a really nice quality of life thing, so that instead of starting at level 1 at 50%, it starts at level 1 at 35% less damage. This just makes it a lot more usable from early levels. It's also received a slight buff from 31% less to 26% less in the late game. Finally, we have changes to monsters in Cruel and Merciless difficulty only. They're adding some new monsters and changing a few to make them more challenging. There's a whole lot of changes here, but you know, roughly speaking, there's monsters that now can use Earthquake. There's monsters that can use Blade Vortex. There's monsters that can use Blast Rain. There's a whole bunch of cool new monsters. Like Blood Elementals have been buffed. They can now use Gore Earthquake. Sea Witches in maps can now use Frostbolt. Ghost Pirates can use Blade Vortex. Rune Titans can use Earthquake in maps. Goatman Shaman can use Orb of Storms. So basically, they've added like leader boss monsters almost. They can use these added powerful abilities. They can become rare monsters or magic monsters that get a bunch of extra fixes. And most exciting, summoners can animate these guys as specters, and now you could get Earthquake statues, guys. Yes, you can get Earthquake statues and just decimate everything with unkillable specters. Sounds good to me. We'll have to see how often they spam Earthquake, but it's looking good. By the way, this is a change a lot of people have been asking for, and we're all very excited about. Arcane Vision is now connected to the same attribute as Pain Attunement. We did it, Reddit. Finally, I will be covering all the changes to the Ascendancy skill trees in upcoming videos so that we can really get into the nitty-gritty. I just wanted to go over the patch notes quickly with you guys. They look like good patch notes. I love the increased monster difficulty by adding new skills and not just buffing, numbers. I love the changes to the skills. That's going to be great. I like the nerf to the Chaos meta. I know some people are going to be very upset about this, but this seems very exciting to me, and I'm looking forward to the launch of Prophecy. See you, and I'll be talking about the massive changes that are upcoming to the Ascendancy classes in an upcoming video. That's all from me. This is Angryaa. Cheers.